For today is our Basque team member, Ms. Karen Elfner. She's program manager over data and implementation here at Basque. And I'll pass it over to you, Karen.
Hi, well, I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about stakeholder engagement because it's a topic that's been really important in my life, both as a parent of a student that had some special needs, but also as an educator and in supporting the work of school-wide systems. So I'm happy to be here. Okay. So what we hope that you get out of this didactic section today is the leadership team's role in obtaining input. So you play a very critical role in getting that input and using that input. And so understanding that role, what are some of the benefits of engaging everyone in your school community, and then some specific strategies. So what exactly could you do to obtain the input and reach that engagement? So hopefully you'll come away with some takeaways that you can do right away. So in terms of your team role, as you probably have figured out, the team is critical to implementation success. And one part of your role is to get the ideas of all of your stakeholders in students, families, other members in your school building, because then you can make sure that what you're building is relevant, it's practical, and it resonates with those individuals. So it's a tricky thing to do, but it will take you a long way if you're able to make those connections. So why do we do it, right? So why are we going to spend the time to engage? Well, the Tier 1 system is the part of your system that's for all, and it should meet the needs of everyone in your school community. And we need to ensure that we collaborate with the entirety of that community, not just a minority population that comes to our meetings, or that we, when we ask a question, they always are the ones who engage and respond. But we want to make sure we're also reaching student and family groups that may appear disengaged or that may have at-risk indicators. So why do we do that? Have you been the person who's been asked your perspective? So have you had the opportunity for someone to come to you and want to know your thoughts and experiences? And what did that feel like when people want to know your perspective on something? So share an experience in the chat and what that was like, what the sharing experience was like for you. And then we'll see what your experiences have been. I know, for instance, my son had an IEP, so for most of his years of K-12, I got an annual survey from the state as a parent of a student with disabilities to complete. And I completed that survey every year, and after about 7 or 8 years, I got tired of completing it because it was just sort of going in this black hole somewhere, and I never saw the results of it. And it wasn't until I worked at a state family engagement with our Office of Special Ed Services that I saw that they actually do get the results and look at those results. They just didn't share them with the families that they got the information from. So I'm having trouble seeing the chat. Let me get. So made you feel valued member. Yeah, Samantha, when someone asks you, and the other thing about asking is, even if I don't answer, I might value being asked. So the fact that your response rate, if you're trying to get information from folks, if your response rate is you're only getting 50 or 60%, that doesn't mean the 30 or 40% who didn't respond don't appreciate that you asked them. So sometimes just the ask has a benefit in terms of building relationship and connection. Chrissy, when those I care for most ask me, it has the greatest impact. So that's a really great perspective. Being heard is close to being loved for the average person. They're almost indistinguishable, but yes. So we can see that there is definitely a value in receiving the question, like being asked, right? And so being asked is an important part of the puzzle. But we want to make sure that as we're moving forward, if you go on to the next slide, that we're thinking about what are the benefits of when we have this sort of engagement? What benefits do we realize if we have successfully had meaningful engagement? If we're going beyond just compliance, like we invited everyone, check, but we really have made the connection and done something to build a relationship and engagement. What are some of the positive impacts that we might experience if we're able to do that? So if you could join us at the Slido, either use the QR code or the link, which I think we were going to. And then you should be able to, once you join the Slido, it has the number there, 2677832. So once you get in there, you can use that to get to the right event. And then you can put your comments about what makes family engagement meaningful and what are some of the positive results if you can do that. Oh, I love that consistency for students. Yeah, when you're getting similar messages at home and at school. Oh, solution focus is great. Increase support in multiple areas. Yeah, feeling valued. Two-way relationships. All part of the same team. So building the partnership, right? So if we're actually engaging, we're in a partnership. And when you're in a partnership, you're not alone, right? You're working together towards a goal. So the solution focused. So it enhances relationships, right? And there we talk some about in professional learning day one about the importance of relationship as in our work as setting the foundation. Meaningful feedback, right? If I know that you really care about what I'm going to say, I might be more likely to provide you something that is meaningful and relevant. This is great. Different perspectives, yes. So we can't know what everyone's perspectives are. We know our perspective. And when we get the different perspectives, it helps us to see things in a different way and come up with better and more diverse kind of solutions to problems. All right, well, thank you so much for engaging in that activity. I feel like we're all kind of on the same page with valuing having the engagement of our stakeholders. So let's think a little bit then about how are we going to do that? What can we do to make sure that we're having that meaningful engagement? So the first and probably the most obvious is a preferred language and method of communication, because how we communicate determines everything else, right? So communication is the key to those relationships. So if we want to understand how we can most effectively communicate with our stakeholders, and we'll give you some strategies about how to identify preferred methods of communication, but that's definitely key because I can't have meaningful communication with you if I'm not using a method of communicating with you that works for you, right? So it's really the base of building relationships. So we want to make sure that communication is meaningful. We do in on our school systems, we tend to have a lot of information and maybe structures or procedures or things that we need to communicate to families. And while that's helpful and it's useful, it's not the same as developing an engaged and relational type of communication. So thinking about understanding your families, and if you understand your families, then it's easier to make that communication more meaningful. And in order to understand our families, we have to learn about it from our families. So they aren't objects behind a glass that we, study and learn about by looking at them. They're people who we learn about by engaging in relationship with them and then understanding things about them that help us to know how to have a meaningful relationship with them. So positive relationships, just like with our students, establishing those from the beginning. So if you start with building a positive relationship, you're going to have more meaningful communication and be able to work on problems together when they arise in a more effective way, because you've already established that. And this is an ongoing thing, right? If you think about relationships and engagement with other people in your life, the people who you stop communicating with, you stop having a strong relationship with, and it's harder to engage in activities with them because you've lost that connection. So we need to keep that connection going. And we'll think about strategies to engage our families and students, and those who maybe aren't responding or coming to our current ways of approaching connecting, and coming up with, if we understand our families, then we can maybe come up with alternative ways that do meet their needs and fit for them. So this is that communication survey that I mentioned before. And this is a survey that was developed by of another project similar to ours. And they used it with their school teams, not as a tool to say, go and take this document and send it to your families. Although it is a document, what I would suggest is that you use this as a way to identify the kinds of questions and the kinds of things about communication preferences that you might want to understand about your stakeholders. But maybe a document, it may not be a great way to get that, because if I don't read the language that it's in, or if I'm not much of a reader, then maybe just strictly a document is not going to be the best way to explore relationship or communication preferences. So use this as kind of a guide to the kinds of questions and things that you want to know about your stakeholders, so that you can develop means of communicating that are most effective. So I know that in the family involvement realm in schools, there can be a lot of check boxes. So we had our open house, we invited people to this event, we sent out this many communications, and that's kind of how we verify that we have done our family involvement. But those tend to be more like check boxes. They tend to be things that we accomplish from the school perspective, but that aren't necessarily building the bridges that we want with all of our stakeholders. So we're going to focus a little bit on that. So let's think about the tasks that are on your plate right now. So developing school-wide and maybe some classroom matrices. How could we get family and students engaged in the development of those? So here are some strategies, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about those. So one is just getting votes. So what's important to our students and families? Do they value the same norms that we're focusing on? So consider using either surveys or buckets to vote, so that they can help you understand what they value. And that doesn't have to be just a survey that is mailed home or emailed home. Think about creatively, like, where are your families? In the car rider line, on family nights, at sports concessions, sporting events. So thinking about connecting with families in natural and opportunities that happen in your daily life, in your school community. So if you do have a survey, make it short, 3-question tops, and then maybe posting the QR codes, not just in the car line with signs or at events in school newsletters, at sporting events, having cheerleaders hold up the QR code and getting the fans to respond. So think creatively about how to connect. We have the idea of matrix preview and comment wall. So having a display with them where families and students have the opportunity to provide feedback. So think about how and where you might do that, where families might naturally come. So a lot of the examples that we've given in this document or on this slide are school-based things, but you could also put that in community areas as well. And then you could do that more easily with something like a matrix on the move cart. So it's a mobile input station where they can look and provide feedback, and that can go both on school sites and community areas so that families, wherever they are, can have an opportunity to participate and give their feedback. We know that administrator voice is critical because everybody looks to that person as the leader. So what comes from the voice of the administrator is recognized as important. So doing something like a quick video highlighting or inviting people's feedback coming from the administrator is going to have a lot more power. And so putting that in places where families connect. So whether it's through social media, in the lobby, on the website, think about where families hear messages and go. And then maybe family feedback spotlight. So once you've collected the information, unlike what I experienced as a parent, where I submitted information, but I never knew what happened, we want to turn that back around and let them know, we heard you. You said this was important, and we did this. So when you know that your voice was heard and that it was taken into consideration and maybe things were adjusted to meet your interests, preference, needs, that's very powerful. So we want to make sure we have a plan for how we're going to let families know what we did based on their input, or students. So we need to remember that engagement isn't one and done. You don't pick one of these, you do it once, and then we're done with engagement. As we mentioned earlier, engagement involves relationship building. Relationships require ongoing engagement and interaction, and we want to do that on a consistent basis. Is there any, okay, so yeah, go ahead. We'll move on to the next one. So this now, the other area that you're developing are your school-wide behavior definitions and maybe levels for those behaviors. So thinking about that task and how you might get some input from families and students. So one really critical piece is understanding the language of your matrices. So is it clear? Does it make sense? So making sure that the language of our matrices makes sense to us as educators, because we all want to be consistent, but it also needs to make sense to the people that are like our students. If our students don't understand it in the way that we expect them to understand it, then it's not going to have the impact. So again, it's making sure that we're taking the time to assess the perspectives of others to make sure that it makes sense. So we have some ideas about where you could do it. Again, some of these, going to where they are, going to where students and families are, is a great way to connect. So we're not expecting them to come to the school, and we're not just sending out things through one mechanism, because various families will connect to different platforms. So we want to make sure we're doing things in a variety of ways. So maybe even setting up a family lens discussion. So where they can look through the definitions and provide feedback. So maybe a green sticky note says this makes sense, and the yellow one says the wording could be more direct or simpler. So think about where it might be, where families might gather and just provide a short opportunity for them to connect in that way. Or maybe something like just feedback cards. So you could send home and cards and ask for them to provide their feedback. What do you think? It could go out with your report cards. Behavior scenarios booth. So this one I love. If you give them a scenario, would they name the behavior the same, use the same name and level? So if I describe a behavior, do I think that is handled in a class or office referral? And making sure, and this example is exactly the example you'd also want to be using with your staff, because that being consistent with when we see this set of behaviors or here, we're calling it the same thing at the same level and developing that common understanding across our staff, but also our students and families, because the students should know when I do these particular behaviors, they're going to call it this, and it's this level. That's our goal, is to have that common understanding. So again, the principal's voice is really critical. And remember that these things are going to happen on a repeated basis. So we're not going to just get input and move on from definitions. The shaping of developing that common language and understanding around definitions requires ongoing engagement. Okay. So we've given you a whole bunch of different strategies and ways that you might get some input from your students and families, both on your matrices and on your definitions. So if there was one of those ideas that resonated with you and that you think you'd like to put into action, if you could share that in the chat. Okay, we got Mr. Chandler, a QR code in the car line. Oh, they have a school improvement group of parents. That's a great group to connect with that are already together. Oh, the cheerleaders holding up the QR codes. I do love that strategy at games. And the behavior scenarios is a really fun one. It's very enlightening too. Love to hear how that goes for you. Okay, well, we'd like to hear if there's some other strategies, the behavior scenarios that you think you'd like to take away. But I want to make sure we have time to get through our case study. Yeah, community voice is a great place. The school improvement committee. All right, so just to kind of wrap up this, we want to make sure that we are doing some things intentionally. So it doesn't have to be big, but it does need to happen. So it could start small, because something small, you're more likely to engage in and do. We don't need to have a massive plan that we can't implement, but we want to make it visible. So we want families to know what's happening. Eventually, right now, we're working in development. And then we'll be teaching these behaviors and norms and skills to our students and our families. And then we're going to continue to put those into action. So on one of the later professional learning days, we're really going to help you learn more about how to put these into action. But connecting with families in a meaningful way and making sure you identify who those family liaisons, the people who connect with your families, and bringing those people in to help to extend those connections. Okay, so any questions or comments about this idea of